Mr. President, the provision of humanitarian relief is extremely complex and challenging due to the bombardment, the destruction of infrastructure, and as we've said repeatedly, the lack of fuel. We mourn the loss of 64 UNRWA colleagues and other humanitarian staff who've been tragically killed, and we extend our deepest condolences to the families and colleagues. We have the utmost admiration for the bravery, selflessness, and commitment of humanitarian workers who are delivering aid to those in need in this perilous environment. Mr. President, we welcome the agreement that has allowed us to get some relief into Gaza via the Rafah border crossing, but these deliveries are a drop in the ocean compared to the vast scale of needs. It's imperative that we're able to get humanitarian supplies and relief into Gaza safely, reliably, without impediment, and at the scale required. In particularly urgent for us to replenish fuel supplies, which are vital for powering most essential services, including hospitals and water desalination plants, and to transport humanitarian relief inside Gaza. And more than one entry point into Gaza is indispensable if we are to make a difference. Karim Shalom between Israel and Gaza is the only crossing equipped to rapidly process a sufficiently large number of trucks. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, scores of civilians have been killed and incidents of settler violence have increased, causing hundreds of civilians to be displaced. Likewise, the violence and closure of checkpoints has impeded access to essential services and food distribution. The permits of some 150,000 to 175,000 Palestinians from the West Bank working in Israel and settlements are now suspended. The situation is causing significant damage to the West Bank economy and Palestinian institutions. We have very real fears about what lies ahead. The current situation may pale in comparison with what is to come. There's a genuine risk that this war could escalate further and spill over into wider region. We must take urgent collective action to prevent this. Mr. President, in light of all that has been described today, what we're calling for is for the parties to agree to pause the fighting on humanitarian grounds. It would provide the required calm and safety for hostages to be released and for the UN to replenish supplies, relieve exhausted personnel, and resume assistance throughout Gaza wherever civilians are in need. It would also provide much-needed respite to civilians who are living under unimaginably traumatic conditions. But with or without a pause in the fighting, I reiterate that all parties on all sides must respect international humanitarian law. This means allowing relief in and taking constant care to spare civilians and civilian objects, including humanitarian and medical workers, facilities, and assets. And this applies whether civilians move or they stay. We are relying on the responsibility of every member state here and across the UN to use all of their influence to ensure that the rules of war are respected and that as far as is possible, civilians are spared further suffering. Thank you, Mr. President.